how they were the first to be able to go and worship Jesus, and how awesome that was. Today, we're going to talk about the wise men. And while we won't start, the wise men didn't have an angel come to them right away. There certainly was angels at work. We'll be in Matthew 2, 1 through 15, if you want to open your Bibles there. But we'll be talking about many things beyond the Magi. Now, it's worth noting that the book of Matthew is the only gospel that talks about the Magi, about them coming and who they were. And there's been a lot of speculation. There's been a lot of interpretation over the centuries as to who they were and what they were doing there. But contrary to the traditional manger scene, I guess, is that there wasn't necessarily just 3 magi. We're going to learn that in a few minutes. We assume there was 3 because they brought 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But what Matthew says is that they were a group of wise men from the east who visited after the birth of Jesus to worship him. After. So if you go home and your magi are hanging out with the shepherds in your manger scene, it's best to move them across the room because they're not there. They're on their way, but they haven't made it yet. Now, the Bible doesn't provide much information about who they were. They were believed to be astrologers who studied the stars and interpreted their movements and used those signs for significant events. They believed that births of important people were announced through the stars. And they also believed that the Magi, or that oh golly, I lost my train of thought. I hate when I do that. That there would be a birth in Judea. But Magi were Gentiles. They were not Jews. Their very way of life was opposite of what the Jews would view as the normal way of life. They were probably Persian or Arabian astrologers who charted the stars and then attached religious significance to their movements. So it's not surprising that these astrologers would see in particular an astrological phenomenon as a sign of the birth of a Jewish king. So these men were well-read, they were unique, not necessarily kings, but at least they were well-regarded, not men of God as far as Judaism is concerned, but they would look at the stars. Today we would probably call them astrologers or scientists, maybe even artists. They would look at what has happened, what is happening now, what could happen in the future, should. Many have tried to use this science to prove the existence of God. Many more have tried to use science to disprove the existence of God. But the Magi simply used their knowledge to find out the truth. And that's what made them unique. So that's kind of an overview of who they were and why they came. But there's so much more than that. This morning I have 4 points, and you can pull out your sermon notes and write those in if you like. But my first point is the Magi feared the unknown. Well, how do you know that they feared the unknown, Mike? Because we all fear the unknown, don't we? Now, they were well-read. They knew what they wanted to find out. They'd been studying for years about the events. We don't know exactly how far they came, but we know they came from the east. I love the depiction in the movie Jesus of Nazareth about the Magi, that they were 3 friends that got together and used their knowledge to come up with the right conclusions. That certainly could be true. It could be true that it was kind of like a group, a university of Magi. It could be they all started out on their own and met on the trail. We really don't know. We don't know exactly when the star appeared. We only know that it eventually ended up over Jesus. And so they venture out, knowing where they're going to Judea, knowing what they're looking for. They're looking for him that was going to be born King of the Jews. but they had a lot of unknowns. Scientists don't like unknowns. They like exacts. And so I'm certain as they ventured out with a certain amount of fear. They had prophecies, legends, the stars, all those things to help them come to the right decision. But that was what got them going. Also notice that the Magi were not the religious elite. God chose not to use them to do what he was doing. It was men that understood the scriptures. And I think that that's very interesting to me. They didn't do that without fear. So tell me, what causes us fear today? What is our fear of the unknown? If you're young, maybe almost out of school, there's fear, what is my life going to be? Where am I going? What's going to happen? Or if you're a young parent, maybe even an old parent, the fear of raising a family. What's that look like? How do I know I'm a good parent? Or is there fear of, am I a good man or woman of God? How about money? Do we fear having not enough of it or using it correctly? Our career. What about retirement? If you ask Luke or Jackson what they think about retirement, they're going, I'm worried about next week. But we worry about those things, don't we? What do we do after we lose a loved one? Or what about death? You see, we have plenty to fear. We have a lot to fear. The story of the Magi shows us how to venture out into the unknown with God leading us. We're not on our own. They were not on their own. Even if they didn't know God as they were about to, he was still leading them, helping them to overcome those fears. It's hard to venture out sometimes when we don't know what to do, when opposition exists, when we're following God and not man. Sometimes it's hard to make that initial decision to move. I don't know what to do because I'm afraid. Even if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Even if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. You've just chosen not to do anything. And so it's those times when we need to lean into Jesus and say, this is where I'm going to go without fear. Like the Magi, we need to go when the Spirit tells us to go. Which brings me to my second point, and that is the Magi made an entrance. The Magi made an entrance. Well, how do you know that? Well, I think we'll discover. Notice in Matthew 2, verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Whoa. Again, notice they arrive after Jesus was born. But we don't know how long that was. That could have been 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. We know it wasn't more than 2 years because Herod is going to do an evil. But we don't know. But they arrived in Jerusalem without the piece of the puzzle. That is, where is he who was born King of the Jews? So who did they ask? So imagine with me, if you would, a cowboy in Eastern Oregon, and he decides that he needs to come to Salem because stars have told him to. So he gets his backpack together, he throws a leg up over the horse, and he starts. For those of us who have driven to Eastern Oregon, you can imagine the train that he'd have to go over. He gets to Salem, and he gets down off the horse. He says, hey, where's the King of the Jews? Just like Ben said, I don't know. Who are you going to ask? Not much of an entrance for a cowboy just to come waltzing into Salem, it was kind of the same for the Magi. Whom do they ask? Notice in verse 3, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. Ruh-roh. They need to talk to King Herod. Who was this King Herod? Well, he was Herod the Great, ruled as the king of the Jews under Roman authority for 33 years, from 37 BC to 4 BC. It's the same Herod that appears in this account in Matthew 2 and Luke 1. From the start, Herod proved to be an extraordinary political survivor. When civil war broke out in Rome, Herod sided with Mark Antony and Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt. When Augustus defeated them in 31 BC, Herod immediately switched sides, convincing Augustus of his loyalty. A true politician. Historians would mark this event as the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. They went from a senate to a supreme commander. For his soldier part, Herod would prove to be a loyal subject to the Roman overlords, maintaining order in Israel and protecting the western flank of the Roman Empire. He was a strange mix of clever and efficient ruler and a cruel tyrant. He was a Jew. He didn't partake of pork, but yet he did other things. He was distrustful, jealous, and brutal, ruthlessly crushing any political opposition, and the Jews never accepted him as their king. He constantly feared conspiracy. He executed his wife when he suspected that she was unloyal. Then 3 sons, another wife, and a mother-in-law. Would kind of make you want to pause to be his 3rd wife. He tried to be a legitimate Jew, but yet he murdered his sons. So Herod was a big deal, and getting an audience with him would not be easy. And 3 magi rolling into Jerusalem was not going to cause the kind of stir that would get them an audience. And this is where we learn, at least people smarter than I have said, that there wasn't 3 magi, there was many. Some say many, many. Some say hundreds and hundreds. And so if you've got 3 magi on camels waltzing into Jerusalem, you probably don't get much of an audience. But if you have hundreds and hundreds of them rolling in, it kind of made Herod what? If we go back to verse 3, he was afraid, and all of Jerusalem with him. They made an entrance. And what kind of fear was associated with that? Hey, Herod, I know you think you're the king of the Jews, but we've actually come to worship the real one. That would cause him to fear. Herod was a celebrity, but he had the answers. So let me ask you, have you ever met a celebrity? Have you ever wanted to meet a celebrity? Would you be starstruck? Or would you be able to just do business as usual? There are times that we need people in power and position to do things that we cannot. And at those times, we also have to make an entrance. We also have to make an impact in our community. We don't have to do it every time. But when we make an impact, things happen. Our youth group here makes an impact in our community. People notice. And it's awesome on them. We do things to make an impact in our community, like our summer get-together, our trunk or treat, Christmas time. If somebody's in need, we fulfill that. Sometimes we have to have people help us do that. Sometimes we need to make an entrance. So making that entrance brings me to my 3rd point, and that, what was Herod afraid of? What was Herod afraid of? Let's count the ways. He had to be afraid of everything. I mean, he just got told that his replacement is a baby somewhere. But like most people in power and position, He was afraid of plenty. Reminds me of the 7 deadly sins: lust, gluttony, greed, slothfulness, wrath, envy, and pride. As we look at Herod, we can see him in so many of those. He certainly was prideful. He envied his power and his position. He showed his evil side by murdering anyone he suspected of disloyalty. He had greed and lust for power. He had much to be afraid of. But he's also sly. He was creative. He wanted to find out about the new king, and he wanted to go about it slyly. So notice what it says in verse 5. And assembling the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Where the Christ was to be born. Now, it should be noted that he didn't send for the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He didn't send for the religious elite. He sent for the scribes. He sent for the priests. Because he didn't really want to have the Pharisees and the Sadducees mixing things up. He wanted to take care of this on his own. So he didn't involve the religious elite. And they told him in Bethlehem in Judea, for it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judea. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. That's from Micah 5. Herod grew up knowing these scriptures. This is not new to him. But in the same way, he didn't know exactly where. And that's why he summoned them. So Herod then brought the Magi in secretly. Verse 7 says, the Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. He needed to know how old this child was. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word that I may come and worship him. And after listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. There are several things that I find very interesting here. One is that the priests and the scribes told Herod exactly where this was at, yet they didn't go. They didn't go. And I find that absolutely astonishing. You're a Jew. You know what is coming. You know what this is. And yet you don't even go. And the other was Herod. Seriously? You're not even going to go and find out? Maybe change your heart? Herod had to see the star also. Yet he did nothing. He was hoping for an easy answer. He was relying on his cunning to have the Magi do it for him because he had much to be fearful of. He had fear of losing control. You see, Rome didn't hesitate to replace an ineffective ruler. And if he lost his power and his position, then he would likely lose his life because he wasn't well regarded. He had much to fear. People in power have much to fear. People that are not in power, they still have fears, but you can't take from them what they don't have. When we're in fear, we make poor decisions. When we're fearful, we make poor decisions. That's almost universal. The question is, what are we afraid of losing? Our power? Our position? Our reputation? Our secrets? What will people think about us? You see, when we get into a position of power, and that becomes the most important thing, then that's when we have something to fear. As long as we use our position or power to simply do what God asks us to do, we have little to fear. So unlike Herod, we need to control our fear, and we need to make good decisions when we're under pressure. Seek counsel. Do those things. And my fourth point is that God always has a plan. God always has a plan. What was God's plan? I mean, how do you establish a new king child while discrediting a tyrant and then escaping safely? When they saw the star, they being the Magi, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house where they saw the child with Mary, his mother, they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. The Magi arrived. They brought gifts, but they brought more. The Magi brought discovery. You see, the shepherds have been the first to worship Jesus, but as Joel said last week, who listens to shepherds anyway? So nobody really knew. But yet all of a sudden, a couple of hundred Magi arrive at your house, to see your new baby. That's going to create a stir. People are going to notice. The Magi brought discovery. Magi brought worship. They brought worship. They were Gentiles worshiping a Jew. That was not really heard of. They were Gentiles worshiping a Jew. And they brought gifts. They brought gifts. The gifts are believed to have symbolic meanings. Gold represents Jesus' kingship. Frankincense represents his divinity. Myrrh represents his mortality. Some say those weren't really practical gifts. That it had been 3 women instead of 3 men, they would have brought practical gifts like diapers and food. That's true. But these were practical gifts. God had a plan. Verse 13, now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until death of Herod. And this was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. Mary and Joseph are living in Bethlehem. And then this herd arrives and worship. And the gifts that they received didn't seem practical, but yet the gold would finance their trip to Egypt. The frankincense would remind them of his divinity. And the myrrh later would represent his mortality. You see, God never wastes the hurt, nor the opportunity. So, what gifts have you received that on the surface didn't seem like a gift? What have you received that didn't seem like a gift? Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR as he was known, was the only president that ever served 4 terms. And he served 4 terms during some of the most difficult and hard times of our country. The end of the Depression and the beginning of World War II. And on December the 8th, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor was attacked, he knew he had to address Congress and America about, basically, we had to get into the war. Something that he had been trying hard to avoid. And his advisors said, you've got to do like a 25-minute speech and really get down. And FDR said, no, I'm going to do 6 minutes. But he did not want to show weakness because he had polio. Everything about his life was difficult. He lived it either in a wheelchair or in bed for the most part. He had to have help getting dressed, going to the bathroom. He had to have help in everything he did. He had a handicap. But he did not want to show weakness by being wheeled down that aisle to address Congress. And so with braces on his legs, his son on one side and a cane on another, he made that walk down that aisle and stood on the podium and asked Congress and the American people to show resolve, to show courage, and to beat back the oppressor that had attacked us. He did not allow his handicap to stop him. Sometimes we're asked by God to do things that make absolutely no sense to us. Difficulties through pain and handicaps. Difficulties in life. Can I have a show of hands here anyone who does not have difficulties in life? Yeah, no hands go up, right? Because we all have them. It's unique. Those are the times when we have the opportunity to minister the most. I recently did a memorial for a fallen firefighter in Gresham. And as I was talking with some of his co-workers about him to get to know him better, one of them said, and it's not a quote, but they basically said, it's not, a measure of a person is not how they act during the times that are good. The measure of a person is how they act during difficult times. Brian was a man of integrity and honor. As he battled cancer, he continued to love his family, his friends, his neighbors, anyone he could. He showed tremendous courage during those times. You see, that's where people take notice, is during our hard times. God had a plan for bringing his son into the world, a unique plan. And when you're watching football and they gather in a huddle, they come up with a play. That play is basically a plan. When we were kids, that would look like something like, okay, John, you're going to go out to the right, and Ben, you go to the left, and we're going to fake to John, but I'm going to give it to Ben, and ready, go. That was our plan. Well, God had a plan. Now, he didn't gather everybody together and go over the plan, but if he did, it would have sounded something like this. So we're going to, Herod's in power, so this is the time to go. We're going to pick Zachariah and Elizabeth, because they're really old, to have John, and that will be such a blessing, and it'll be an answer to Scripture. Mary, she's going to have Jesus. And we're going to have Joseph, and Jesus, he's going to be an awesome father to you. I just know it. And then when you're born, we're going to have magi come from a long ways away. They're going to find you, and they're going to kind of usher you in. They're going to bring you gifts, and we're going to use those to go to Egypt to fulfill Scripture until after Herod dies. That's the plan. Okay, ready, go. Seemed like there could have been an easier way, right? Had to be an easier way. But was there? Every one of us has a handicap. I'd like you to think for a moment right now, everything that had to happen for you to be here today, in this place. For some of us, it meant getting in the car with our parents and being driven. Some of us had to travel long distances through many relationships and many hardships in order to find Jesus and be here today. But all of us had a journey that was unique. All of us had a journey that was special. And God uses every one of our handicaps, our shortcomings, and everything else to bring glory to Him and the people around us. Romans 8:28 says this, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. How many things work together? All things. How many? All things work together for good for those who are called according to His purpose. You see, Jesus uses all things for His good, for His purpose. We all have handicaps. We all have fear. As we celebrate the birth of Jesus, the story of His birth today and tomorrow, As we open gifts to each other and celebrate and worship Him, let us never forget that God has an elaborate plan for each one of us, regardless of the handicaps that we may have. In fact, He's going to use those for His glory. That He will use our weaknesses, our pain, our fear, and yes, even our strength for good. Faith overcomes fear every time. Faith overcomes fear every time.